Well, I can hear Big Ben chiming in the background. So hello and a very warm welcome to the fourth joint National Eczema Society Derm Academy webinar this year on eczema and the mind-skin connection, how this affects our emotional well-being. I'm Carsten Flohr, I'm consultant dermatologist and professor at St. John's Institute of Dermatology at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital. The timing for this webinar is perfect. It is National Eczema Week, as you'll be aware, and World Eczema Day today. This year's NES campaign is called More Than Just an Itch, focusing on the ways eczema can impact people's mental health and emotional well-being, hence today's webinar topic. And we will initially have 3 talks, and we'll then be joined by further expert panel members from our adult and pediatric eczema teams for a Q&A session with questions submitted from the audience. So that's your chance then to ask us questions as we go along with the talks. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Please do not video or audio record or take photos of any sections of the event. We're recording the webinar and we'll share this online post-event subject to compliance and consent requirements. The webinar is live streamed on the National Eczema Society Facebook page. And you can see and hear the presenters and panelists. We cannot see or hear you, just so that you're aware of that. So to ask a question relating to the presentations or when we're doing our panel Q&A, please use the Q&A function on Zoom, not the chat function. Questions can be posted anonymously if you prefer. And we'll do our very best to answer as many questions as possible in the time available. We welcome your feedback after the event, which can be submitted via an electronic survey, and the link will be shown on screen and will be sent by email to you. And if you'd like to make a donation to support the National Eczema Society, details are available on their website, and we will show again the QR code for this at the close. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker today. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rukhsana Ali. She is our clinical psychologist in our pediatric severe eczema clinic at St. John's Institute. She also runs a specialist clinic for complex dermatology with Dr. Susanna Barron, consultant dermatologist at St. John's, and Susanna is also joining us as part of the Q&A panel later. Rukhsana has been a lead clinical psychologist within Evelina Children's Hospital for a number of years, but has got over 20 years of clinical experience under her belt and qualified with a doctorate in clinical psychology from the Royal Holloway University of London. She also holds a postgraduate diploma in cognitive behavioral therapy and is trained in several other therapy models. So today, Rukhsana, you're going to tell us about how eczema affects our emotional well-being. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Flohr. Lovely. So as I'm really delighted to be speaking to you all today about thinking about how eczema affects our emotional well-being. And I've tried to make this session actually quite practical because I'm mindful that lots of people don't have aren't as fortunate as perhaps we are in our centres to have access to psychologists or psychology. And I'm sure you're all aware that the prevalence of eczema is on the rise, and globally it affects 20% of children up to 10% of adults. And in the UK, that's comparable as well. And eczema and having eczema and the burden of skincare can impact on psychological well-being. And what we know is there's this almost reciprocal relationship as well between eczema and psychological well-being, in that when your psychological well-being deteriorates, so as does your eczema. And there's a greater risk of developing depression and anxiety. And this has been shown in numerous studies. And more recently, there was a systematic review of all the research, which has found this. And consequently, it impacts on our quality of life. So that's in terms of what you're able to do, how you're able to manage your day-to-day work or life and hobbies. And what we found is that as people with eczema go through different life stages, different mental health challenges can arise. And I'm going to take you through a bit of a whirlwind tour in terms of some of the issues that can come up. But before I do, the way I sort of view this mind-body link is that when I see patients, I tell them that the body is like the tentacles of the brain. that is whatever you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing upstairs tends to come out downstairs. And I think this really highlights it, because I think this is a good way of acknowledging it. And for young people especially, they get it. As soon as I say this, they understand. So then they understand, actually, that's the reason why I need to work with psychology, not just with my dermatology team. And as I've said, there's been lots and lots of research looking at the factors that impact on a person living with eczema and how this can then impact on their mental health. So I'm going to take each of these different issues in turn. But I have to stress that sleep, I think, from my point of view, is probably one of the biggest. And I think the research has shown this as well, that actually once sleep is compromised, it almost has a knock-on effect and a ripple effect with some of the other issues. And with each of the issues, I'm going to provide strategies in terms of how you can manage them. So as I've said, sleep is commonly disrupted. And 60% of parents of children with eczema report that it affects their sleep. And up to 90% of adults with eczema have disrupted sleep. And this is often due to the itch or the pain. And I know that Professor Floor might be going into this in a bit more detail in his talk. And not only does sleep affect the individual, but it also impacts on the parent and the family. It impacts on their difficulties in terms of how they're able to manage the following day, daytime sleepiness, poorer concentration, and general quality of life. So in terms of when I see people for sleep and when they're struggling with their sleep, I often check with them, are you following your care plan and advice that's been given to you by your consultant or your team? And if they are, then it's about taking it the next step and thinking about sleep hygiene. Things like, is your bedroom cool enough? Are you using cotton sheets or natural sheets as opposed to more of the man-made fibers? Have you got a fan in your room? Are you avoiding stimulants such as alcohol or caffeine before bedtime? Are you avoiding screens and blue light again before bedtime? And again, if all that's happening, I might suggest that they apply what I call the calm break. So that's where you're taking that time out before bed to almost calm your brain down. Because what we know is that actually life is hard enough as it is, but then when you've got that additional load of managing your eczema, it can create an additional burden. So actually it's doing things like winding down activities, whether that's reading, mindfulness, or deep breathing before bed, that can be a real help. And for babies and young people, it might be that they need scratch sleeves, especially if they're scratching a lot in their sleep. And as people get older, it might be that they need gloves. But again, I know lots of patients have mentioned to me that often what they'll find is they'll take it off in the middle of the night, or if they really want to have a good scratch, they will. Tickling and stroking the skin is another good way, just in terms of providing a different sensation to the itch. And also things like using the cold ball rollers or cool packs, again, can also help do that. And there's lots of pros and cons in the literature around co-sleeping, because when I see parents, a number of them mention to me that they do co-sleep, and that's because that helps their child to stop scratching, or they're able to apply the emollient and then the child's able to sleep. But the side effect of that, of course, is that the parent isn't getting any sleep. And so it is that knock-on effect on the family. And sometimes as well, for patients with eczema, I might even recommend habit reversal, because it might be that actually, despite all their best efforts and everything else they're doing to manage their eczema and the symptoms, it's actually just turned into a habit. And this book, The Eczema Solution, is a good self-help book that takes you through habit reversal if you want to learn a bit more about how to do that. As I'm mindful again that some units don't offer it through either their specialist nursing team or their psychology team. So again, it could be that you have to use additional resources. And then when we're thinking about eczema and education or work, again, like I said, if you're not sleeping, that's going to affect your concentration, and that's going to impact on how you perform at school or at work. So often when I speak to schools, they'll tell me, oh yeah, I understand all about eczema, it's just a bit of dry skin. And actually a big role I take in is in educating them that it's not just dry skin. There's so much more going on. So it's actually about understanding the condition So it might be that with your employers as well, if you feel that you want them to know, that you have to educate them. And if your concentration is waning during the day because you've not had enough sleep, is it then being a bit kinder to yourself and breaking tasks down, or not giving yourself so much to do? And when people are finding that their eczema is getting on top, they might find that they're missing work or school. And this can trigger thoughts of not being good enough or being a failure. So often I'll remind patients to be kind to themselves. And certainly because of the nature of eczema and its chronic condition, it might be that actually you need to follow something like the Equality Act, and you need certain adaptations made to your workplace, that you might need to be placed away from a radiator and have a fan near your desk. Or it might be at school that actually you're given frequent breaks to apply your emollients. And if that doesn't feel like something you want to discuss with your employers or your school, is it again that you keep your hands busy and use things like fidget toys? And there are certainly lots of different ones. So this is a new one that's a roller that nobody would realize it's a fidget toy, but you just roll it between your hands, as opposed to some of the more traditional childhood ones. And again, is it that you apply something cold to your body, like the roller, or a cold can if you haven't got access to one, or a cool pack? And then moving on, like I said, eczema can also have this ripple effect around those around you. And research has shown that increased parental or carer stress actually increases patient distress. So often when I'm seeing parents or carers, I'll be telling them it's about also you putting your oxygen mask on first. It's not always about necessarily like trying to put the child first, or the person you're caring for first. And that's easier said than done, because often with parents, there can be a lot of guilt around managing the condition. And there's been lots of literature that's been written about this. And again, it's about thinking about that self-compassion that you show yourself. Would you speak to a friend in the same way that you might speak to yourself and say that you're a terrible parent? Or actually, would you speak to yourself with kindness? And again, similarly, a recent study found that there are challenges with families and carers actually living in the moment. So actually enjoying perhaps a day at the beach, as opposed to thinking about all the things that could go wrong, or all the things they need to factor in order to manage that person with eczema. So I often recommend to people just that idea of everyday mindfulness, or taking that one moment away from today. If you could, what would be your snapshot? What would be your postcard moment? And everyday mindfulness refers to things like just actually enjoying being with your child at the swimming pool, as opposed to panicking about what's going to happen next when they come out and when their eczema flares, or when they go back to school. So just actually taking that moment to be there and be with them. And finally, I often recommend that parents and caregivers get a team, their own team around them. So who can support you when you're having a hard time? Who can give you that advice or boost you up when you need to put your oxygen mask on first? And then not only just with parents and carers, but also eczema can impact on friendship and relationship. So we know that missing school or work and that visible difference can impact on friendships. And there's lots of worries about that stigma, especially if you are embarking on a new friendship or relationship. What will people think when they see my skin? And Changing Faces has some really good resources in terms of how to talk to people about a visible difference. So I'd really recommend you look at that. Or it might be that actually when your eczema is particularly bad, you're missing events or activities or work. And again, that you're feeling that disconnect from other people. So then you're increasing your social isolation. And as a result, what I often find with teenagers is because they spent a long time struggling with their eczema or missing school, they often find that they're missing those social skills. So recently, I had a young person ask me, how do you start a conversation with somebody? Because they're about to start a new school. So they were really unsure of what do you say to engage somebody. And that almost creates that fear of judgment, that social anxiety, that worry of what will other people think of me. And then as people get older, it's then thinking about how do I manage intimate relationships? And again, what will my partner think about my eczema, or if my skin's flaring? And again, I'd always recommend having that open and honest discussion with them about your fears and worries. And finally, I just wanted to make a bit of a comment about these unwanted comments, as I'd call, or bullying. But actually, a lot of the young people I see, and even some of the young adults, refer to it as banter. So the way I frame it is this something you wanted? How did it make you feel? And if they're telling me, oh, actually, I didn't like it, I'm a bit like, well, maybe it's not a comment that's being helpful. It's actually a comment that's quite hurtful for you. And thinking about how can you manage those, and modeling what can you say in response, or how can you manage that? And again, Changing Faces has a really good section on how to manage when people do make comments, whether it's out of curiosity or perhaps a bit more unfriendly. And like I said, because eczema at times can have this visible difference, there's lots of literature that shows having that visible difference can impact on your self-esteem. And so often that having eczema and your self-esteem almost becomes entwined. So people will often tell me, my life won't be better until my eczema is perfect. But actually what I get them to do is broaden that lens and almost separate the two, to think about their other attributes, the other things they're good at. And often I'll encourage people to keep a wall of achievements of things that they can be proud of, so things that they've done day to day, aside from their eczema, that helps them almost broaden their personality and their being. Another one I think that comes up regularly with a lot of the people I see, whether they're young or older, is that Instagram effect, that people are often comparing, why can't my life be like that? Or my life would be better if I didn't have this. And again, I get them to almost do a bit of a reality check, because what we expect and what we see isn't necessarily reality. So we know that, for example, people on social media aren't going to put the worst picture of their life up. They're going to put that 50th picture that was the best picture, and perhaps they might edit it a bit as well to make it look much better. So actually, there's that aspect. So is it really true what you're seeing and what you're hearing? And then on the flip side, we don't know what's also happening behind closed doors, because it might be that that person's also struggling, or that person has other challenges that we're not aware of. And something that's quite a big one and has had a lot of research again is that fear of judgment, this social anxiety. So often I'll hear there are a lot of patients telling me that they avoid going out because they don't want to be stared at, or that they're camouflage and they wear clothes that cover up their skin. So even today in our severe eczema clinic, I've got a new student, and she commented, oh, I've noticed that everyone was wearing like full length clothes covering themselves up. It's almost like they were fearful of what the reaction might be if somebody saw their skin. And again, I'd suggest that people always gradually test out your fears and test them out with people you trust. So maybe try wearing shorter sleeves with good friends or family and seeing how you feel and how that makes you feel, and building up your confidence to almost show you evidence against what you fear will happen, and to give you that almost that alternative narrative of how you could be living your life. And eczema itself comes with a huge burden of skincare. And sometimes as well, I'll often hear patients telling me, my skincare plan from the team is great, but actually it's not realistic, it's not manageable. I don't think I can go, interrupt my working day to go and apply my emollients. So again, if that's the case, I would always suggest have a chat with your team, think about what's realistic and what you're able to do, and is there a way you could adapt it? And with the rise of social media, again, there's lots of expectations around the different treatments. So again, I would suggest that you focus on reliable sources, whether that's the NHS website, your team, or things like the British Association of Dermatologists, and focusing on that, as opposed to almost thinking this might be a miracle, this might just cure you, and then you don't need to worry. And then when that doesn't happen, feeling devastated and hopeless. And also, a lot of people worry about their eczema getting worse or reflaring if they start tapering off treatment or stopping treatment. And I always recommend that people write a list of their worries and discuss them with their teams, because actually your team can guide you. And if it's the case that that is a fear, what is the worst thing that could happen if you were to stop your treatment? If your eczema was to get worse, what do you think your team would do? What would your team do if you asked them? So I don't necessarily think that Again, what we fear happens in reality. And finally, I do see some patients who are just completely hopeless. They've been through numerous clinics, numerous medications, and just think there's no point. Like, why am I trying? And actually, I always ask them, but what would be different in your life if your eczema was just a bit better managed, or if that you were able to get a better night's sleep, or that you were able to concentrate in school? What would be different? And almost thinking about their bigger goals and the wider picture again, so broadening that lens. And finally, I wanted to end this talk with thinking more generally about the distress, because as I said, psychological distress is well known in eczema, and we know that it appears. And because of that mind-skin link, it's really important that people learn how to manage their feelings. So these are some ideas in terms of how to manage your stress, anxiety, or low or irritable sort of feelings. It could be that you're using mindfulness, or that everyday mindfulness, like I said, just taking that time to enjoy that first cup of coffee in the morning and noticing the taste, the temperature, and how it makes you feel as it goes down into your chest and down into your stomach. Doing breathing exercises can help, and I know some people do yoga as part of that. Doing crafts or knitting and Tetris, there's lots of really good evidence for when you're using both hands, that actually that just calms down your nervous system and just calms down your anxious brain. And I've put gaming in brackets because I'm also mindful I don't want to give permission to teenagers to say you should be gaming all day and all night. It's more again about using it in a way that just helps you calm down rather than agitate. And again, exercise, any form of movement. So just even a stretch can start to change things in your nervous system and just help to realign that balance. Just so I would always recommend that people try and do a little bit of something, even if it's dancing whilst washing your dishes, do whatever. Or if all else fails and you really can't cope with any of that, just passing a ball back and forth or an object between your hands. Because again, you're engaging both parts of your brain and just calming down your nervous system. And again, these are other ideas that we often use in our clinic with younger people, and they can be used for older people. And these are more like to bring you back in the moment. So it could be that you're using your senses in terms of what you can see, touch, hear, smell, or taste, or naming as many things in your room that you can see that begin with a certain letter, or describing an object, so focusing on how it looks, the texture, the temperature, how it feels. Is it soft? Is it hard? The colors. So again, that's just to bring you back and help you calm your brain down. But again, I'm mindful that we do have some patients who are worriers. And then if you're having those types of thoughts, that's where writing it out or journaling can be really helpful. And again, if you're experiencing these if only or what if thoughts, I always ask people, is there another way of looking at this? Or if this was a friend or a family member, what would you be saying back to them? And writing out that answer. And again, some of those more critical thoughts about ourselves, like I'm not good enough or I'm ugly. Again, would family members agree? And it's about talking to yourself with kindness and learning that self-compassion, as well as noticing your other skills and abilities. And unfortunately, though, self-harm and suicide is quite prevalent in people with eczema. And in a recent meta-analysis, they found 44% of people living with eczema were more likely to experience thoughts of suicide. And in a study with adolescents, they found just under 16% reported suicidal thoughts compared to 9% of those without eczema. And I always suggest that if ever you're concerned about a loved one, speak to them, ask them. Because by asking them, you're not going to increase the risk, you're not going to make someone self-harm. There's no evidence that that happened. It's more about actually approaching them with kindness and care. And often you can find that they will respond. And myself and some other colleagues have co-authored an article on British Skin Foundation about managing self-harm in skin disease. So that has some really good ways of approaching those conversations. And also, if you find out that you are self-harming, what you can do to cope. So that it's got lots of really good strategies on this. So I'm not going to repeat them in this talk, but I would suggest you have a look at that link. And I've finished off with different areas of support. So the National Eczema Society has some really good resources, as does Changing Faces and the Eczema Outreach support groups. So I would always recommend have a look at those, because it might be that their help is just enough. But if it is significantly impacting on your life, speak to your consultant on your team, see if you can get a referral to psychology or psychiatry if there is one. And if not, maybe it might be that you need more local services. So it might be that either you need to go through your GP or you can self-refer. And as always, if ever you're at serious risk or think you might be at risk of hurting yourself, don't hesitate. That's a medical emergency. So you go to A&E or dial 999. And here are some areas of support for children and adolescents. So we've got Young Minds and The Mix and Papyrus UK, which is a suicide prevention website, and Childline. So with Young Mind and The Mix, they have some online support, and there's some apps there that are really good for young people. And then for adults, there's the NHS Talking Therapy service, which you can often self-refer to, as well as Mind, Samaritans and Rethink. And again, I've got other apps that can be helpful just in terms of offering you mindfulness or other strategies to manage your emotions or sleep. So thank you so much. I know I've given you a bit of a whirlwind, but I hope that was helpful.